Okay, good morning. Excuse the technical difficulties in this wonderful world of audio engineering and sound. You never quite know what you're going to get. Um, Let me just get rid of that. Okay, we've got about three devices here all running simultaneously. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Hello, Jeffrey. Hello, Noosh. Hello, Maha. Hello, anyone else that's out there that I haven't seen. Today, we start the first of our series known as Expand Your Bandwidth, where we'll be discussing frequency, energy, and vibration. In the words of the late, great Nikola Tesla, if you want to understand the universe, then start thinking in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. We're joined by our friend and mentor, August Worley, who's going to be lifting the lid on this lofty topic for us today. We would like to encourage any questions that you have. I know in the schedule it says that we'll have a question time at the end, which we will. But as we're going to be plowing through so much information, if you do have questions during the interview, just pop them in the comments box and we'll try to get to them and answer them. All right. So, good morning, Mr. Worley. How are you? Oh, I've got you muted. Hold on. There we go.
There we go. I'm unmuted. You're unmuted.
All right. Yes, you can hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, wonderful. Yes. Well, hopefully that's the end of the tech specs for the morning. And we can get down to some business.
Yeah.
All right, August. So where are we going to start with this?
Wherever you want to.
Okay, well, let's talk about some basic terms then. Many people in the spiritual community today know these terms, but perhaps there's some distortion as to what these terms actually relate to. So let's start off with frequency and vibration.
Okay. Well, and I sent you some graphics if you've got a picture of that sine wave.
Okay.
You know what we're talking about when we talk about frequency is that it's a number one. It's a periodic waveform, which in other words it means it repeats. So it has to repeat at least once in order to be considered a frequency. Anything less than that is just spurious noise. And so when you look at that frequency, it moves for a certain amount of time in a positive direction on the y-axis, and it moves in a negative direction on the y-axis, and it completes a cycle. And if you look at it, if you were to fold it back on itself, it would be a kind of a football shape. Again, this is just a representative sine wave. If you want to overlay the next sine wave, let's start hanging some terms on this, because that's where I wanted to start with all of this, is to just make sure that everybody understands the terms that we're all using. And a lot of this is it's mathematics, it's physics, but it's also music. But if you're going to be talking about a frequency, we all need to be on the same page. So if you look at this diagram, what is a frequency? Well, a frequency is a period or a cycle per second, and it's got its own specific terms, which was developed in codified in the 1930, I believe, as hertz. So it was named after the physicist that developed the concept. So if you look at our little diagram, the complete cycle of the waveform is called the wavelength. So that is, again, beginning from, it starts at zero, reaches a peak at some point, then crosses the zero axis at some point, which is in this case, and we call that a node. and then it'll go negative again. And then when it moves through, it'll reach a trough. So that's called a peak, and that's called a trough. And when it completes its cycle and arrives back at zero again, that is one complete frequency.
Okay, so just to simplify that, the kind of S on its sides, back to front, is the full cycle, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so we got the arch over and the arch under, representing one cycle, which is known as a 1 hertz.
Right.
And that's a cycle per second. It's measured in seconds, correct?
Right. You can and that's the thing. You can't hang the designation of hertz on it unless you know what the time domain is. Okay. The period of the cycle is always implied that you mean one complete cycle. The thing that's the variable is the amount of time it takes to go from zero back to zero again.
Mm-hmm.
In order to be called a frequency. And again, basically there's two different types of what you could consider to be frequencies. And one is actually a periodic waveform, or the other one would be noise. And we're not really going to get into that, but noise is essentially all frequencies at the same time, and we've all experienced that. If you've ever tuned between the radio stations on your car radio, that's noise, that hissing sound.
Mm-hmm.
All frequencies, all coming at you, all for one low price. That is a completely different animal what we're talking about here. So, okay.
Yeah, so that's the basis of frequency. Now, what about vibration? How are frequency and vibration different?
Okay. Well, now I'm going to hang a time element on this and get definitive with it. We're going to say that this is a 1 kilohertz frequency, and it's like, oh, okay, so that by designating it as 1,000 hertz, 1 kilohertz, 1,000 hertz. That means that this thing is repeating in 1 second 1,000 times.
Okay, so that means that we have 1,000 of these upside down S's to a second.
Right. That's pretty fast. And another way of looking at it mathematically is you could say this one cycle, if this was a 1 kilohertz frequency, this one cycle would occur in 1 millisecond.
Right.
Pretty fast, but it's not that fast in the grand scheme of things. Okay.
No, and maybe we should just point out. I mean, give an example of 1 kilohertz, if you could.
Let's see, what do I have here? 1 kilohertz. Well, C1. I don't know. There's trying to put it in mathematical terms, because A would be 440 hertz. So you double that, it would be the octave A. And I'm trying to find my A. I got a kalimba for Christmas, and this is pretty cool. My niece gave me this, but I think it would probably be around. I think it's around probably. Well, that's would be around. Excuse me, around 800 hertz or so. 880 hertz, I believe.
Okay, and just to give a reference, that would be some like what's the vocal range? Because that's what I'm trying to put out to the viewers so they understand what's sitting in the bandwidth.
Yeah.
Because vocals, I mean, what's the bandwidth of the human voice?
Well, it depends on the singer.
Well,
normal range. Yeah, normal ranges in the hundreds of hertz. I don't really have, I've got charts for that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, I've got one stuck on the side of my desk over here, but I can't get at it. Well, it's in a musical range. Okay. And I think I'm gonna bust out my my electromagnetic radiation spectrum chart. We could get the ball rolling on this.
He loves this one, folks.
Yep. Here we go. He's at it again. All right, so this is a great little chart, and you can see it's quite extensive. I'm getting a little bit of glare. I tried to close the window, but this is the electromagnetic radiation spectrum. Sounds very, very sophisticated, but if you look, they actually have, that's why this is such a great chart, because it has so much information on it, and it gives you a really understanding of what we're talking here. So, but basically, there's a little indicator over here. See this little keyboard? This is the music spectrum for the keyboard. So basically the way this thing works is it starts over here. This is a lower frequency going to a higher frequency, and then it kind of wraps around. So, you know, so there's lots of frequencies that are below the sonic range. Again, you know, if this is the lowest note on a piano, we've got a lot of frequencies that are below that. And as you just saw, there's a lot of frequencies that are above that. But in my discussion, and it's great too, because it's got these little icons over here on the side. And basically, when you talk about frequency, you're talking about a wavelength being relative to an actual physical mass, which is one of the keys to, we're going to get into resonance in a couple weeks or so. Yeah, and there's these little icons off to the side, because there is a physical relationship between the wavelength and the physical structure of the element. So basically, to distinguish, I distinguish vibration as a subset of frequency, because I classify vibration as being something that you can physically feel. Because as we go up this chart, you can't say that I can feel microwaves. Microwaves are well, here's radio waves, and here's the microwave domain up here, and light is way the hell up there. So you can't actually feel physically. Well, you can experience light in several different ways. But there's all this information in here. These are all frequencies in the radio band. So we go from, once you got out of the audio spectrum, now you're in the very low frequency, medium frequency, very high frequency, again, VHF, you know, UHF, ultra high frequency, and all that. These are all frequencies that are occurring either naturally or man-made, that you don't experience. That's why I distinguish vibration as being something that you can experience physically. So somebody says, and again, you know, you've heard me go on and on about this. Somebody says, "Oh, I need to raise my vibration," and when I ever hear that, I got to tell you, my sphincter tightens slightly, because it just, you know, there's so much wrong with it. Okay, number one, you're not just one frequency. You are a spectrum of frequencies. You are a energetic collection. You've got all sorts of frequencies all happening simultaneously. It is denigrating to yourself to consider yourself to be one frequency. Don't do that to yourself. It's demeaning. You're a big, wonderful potpourri cornucopia of multiple frequencies, you know, sound and light and everything in between. So, you know, hanging that you're one frequency on this is doing yourself an injustice. Right. So, and plus it assumes a linearity. If you want to raise your frequency, well, you're assuming that it's like a linear scale, and that higher equals better, which is also doing yourself an injustice. What about all these other frequencies down here? Again, you know, so basically you've got this, the cosmic, you know, you as a cosmic instrument, if you were a piano, you know, you're saying, okay, well, I'm at C right now, but if I get to C sharp, I'm going to be that much better. And one day, if I pray a lot and I'm a really good boy, I'll get to D, you know?
Yeah, so it would be like what you're saying. It would be like just being one key and not the full band of the 128.
Exactly, exactly. So, you know,
Okay.
because don't forget also, when I do this sonically, when you generate a frequency, there's an intention behind this, okay? And theoretically, you're also creating gravitational waves that expand out in every direction throughout the universe. It's a little hard to get our heads around, but just by doing this, I'm putting those frequencies out into space in the form of a gravitational wave. Sonically, since there's, you know, that these waveforms are moving through the air and compressing and, you know, rarefying this parcel of air that's around me in order to generate sound. So it's only going to go to a certain radius around me, but at other levels, other more esoteric levels, it's infinite. So you're creating this infinite disturbance of the force of the universe by doing this.
So let me just ask you, because one question that did come up from a friend of mine actually was, how does sound impact the body? Because I understand that we hear it through our ears, but there's also a process of conduction, right? Where like if sound, the mechanism is the atoms within the particles within the air compressing and vibrating, then how does that affect us as an energetic field ourselves?
Well, at the physical level, you know, you have to consider that our cellular structures, you know, at the cellular level, each one of those cells is basically a little water bubble surrounded by an oily membrane, and they're all connected together. And so when a wave front strikes the physical body, again, we've got organs that turn that wavefront motion into a vibrating membrane. And, you know, again, it moves through your ear canal and stimulates your eardrum, and then creates the neural activity to trigger and to tell your brain what it's hearing.
And that's what we perceive as sound.
Yeah, that's what
mentally,
yeah.
right? Neurologically.
Yes. But again, this is a frequency phenomenon. So depending on what the wavelength is, depending on how big that wavelength is going to determine whether or not you feel it. Because right now we're all we've got microwaves passing through our bodies and we don't even know it. You know, so you can't. So here's my point: is you can't equate a frequency with a vibration, because a vibration is only a frequency that you experience at the physical level. Otherwise, you don't want to experience, you don't want to feel the vibrations of AM radio carrier frequencies or
Right.
FM radio carrier frequencies or all that other bandwidth that's in between.
So in a sense, our system it's a filtration system.
Yes, actually, right? Absolutely.
We are a filter, like a high
Yeah.
pass, low pass. We cut out all the noise and we take the good parts.
Yeah. You know, do you really want to be able to tune into the football game without a radio? You know, you really want to hear everything that's on AM radio being all broadcast simultaneously.
Yeah, just that vision, right? I mean, if we saw everything in the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, like if we had the vision of reptiles and the hearing of a whale and such, like, there would just be such a bombardment of the senses that we wouldn't be able to function.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, and again, I draw it's the equivalent of until meteorology got to a certain level of sophistication, what was the way that you would determine how the wind was, how the wind was blowing, what the wind was doing? You look out your window and you look for visible signs, right? You watch for the motion of the trees.
Yes.
You watch for, you know, maybe the leaves scattered on the ground to be moving in a certain direction. And that way you go, oh, it's windy out or it's not windy out. And, oh, the wind's coming from the northwest and it looks like it's a, you know, pretty stiff. You don't see the air that's actually moving the tree.
No, and we don't see the air that we breathe either.
So you perceive vibration as being a physical element when you can feel it in your physical body. You can't feel, you can't experience 5G, for example, physically. It's
Right.
there, but you can't experience it personally. You just have to, you have to measure it. You have to understand that, okay, so we're propagating this microwave frequency and throwing it out into the space. And so it's there. We can measure that, but you're not going to feel it.
Right.
So
Yeah. So basically, to simplify it, there are multiple frequencies, and vibration is the bandwidth of frequency that we experience
exactly.
at our level of density. Because if we look at the spectrum as levels of density,
Mhm.
whereas we are here in let's call it third density,
Mhm.
we have the experience of whatever sits within that bandwidth. It's not
Yes.
just like one frequency.
Yes. And it's a relatively small bandwidth. I just showed you the chart. That's,
Yeah.
that's extensive, and and it goes on to infinity. There's frequencies that are up there. We just haven't, there's only so much room on a chart,
Yeah.
but there's frequencies up there that we really haven't quite, we don't have any use for, quite frankly, is in field of study, because we've got so many other frequencies that we are interested in.
Right.
But it's really interesting that 800 hertz is about roughly the frequency cutoff for what we experience as vibration. And we as a species understand this because the wavelength at around 800 hertz is directly related to the distance between our two ears. So when
Oh,
so when you start getting into that that bandwidth of frequencies, the way that you can locate the origin of a point source of sound generation is through phase differential, your ears. So in other words, if you hear a sound that's up around one kilohertz or so, the phase differential, in other words, the time differential from when, say, the sound is originating from over here, the amount of time it takes for the sound to reach this ear versus the sound reaching this ear is a certain amount of time. And
so
so,
it's different. Okay.
yeah, so your brain decodes that phase differential in order to say, oh, the sound came from over there. Lower frequencies tend to lose that cohesion. So low bass frequencies usually are transmitted through physical mass, and it's really difficult. It's more difficult to point out where the origin of a low frequency source is. When you hear that truck coming up the street, you feel the vibration. You can kind of hear the low rumble. But if you're on a street corner, on an intersection, you may not know where on the street that's coming from. Is it coming from that end of the street, that end of the street, that end of the street, or this end of the street?
Okay. So can I just pull back to the 800 hertz?
Yeah.
Like, can you explain that again? The relevance between the two ears of how 800 hertz is the top end of vibration that we experience?
Yeah, it's like I say, it's an approximate thing, and because and here's the thing. This is where I start getting into the what I jokingly call the numbers racket, because when you start hanging numbers on all this stuff, you really have to become more precise in your understanding and your vocabulary as to what you're actually talking about. But just just for conversational purposes, we're going to say that 800 hertz is the cutoff frequency. So, again, we're talking number of cycles per second,
Mm-hmm.
800 cycles per second of, this periodic waveform. So you've below that, you generally, your physical structure generally doesn't distinguish directionality quite as effectively as frequencies above 800 hertz, because the higher frequencies are more perceived by your ears. The lower frequencies are more perceived by your physical structure. Again, we don't just listen with our ears, we listen with our body.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the higher frequencies are more generally heard by your ears. And again, you can distinguish, and again, this is an evolutionary kind of thing. So, because if the, if the, if the Tyrannosaurus or, whatever, the saber-toothed tiger is over there, you want to know that, and your brain can distinguish how long it takes for that sound to travel to your ears. And again, the phase differential, the time differential between when it reaches this ear versus when it reaches this ear tells your brain does the calculations to say, oh, it's over there.
And that's what gives us our spatial
right. The spatial recognition. Yes.
Okay, we've got a question coming from Mary. It says, if the idea of raising our personal frequency is injustice we do to ourselves, and what do people mean when they say that we need to raise our vibration?
Well, like I say, there's just a general abuse of the terminology, if you will. It's just my spiritual mentor used to present that as we evolve and become more conscious, we need to invent new terminology in order to appropriately share the experience, because language is a shared experience, apples and oranges, that kind of thing. And what is carried with that concept is that we need to get more precise. We need to invent new words, number one, and number two is that we need to get more precise as to what we mean when we say this. So by saying I want to raise my vibration, again, it does you, it's disingenuous because you are a very broad spectrum of frequencies, and all of them are valuable. Okay, so that's why I say you want to, if anything, you want to widen your bandwidth. You want to expand your bandwidth. Expand is a great word because it's it's a concept of becoming larger, becoming more than what you are. You're becoming better, if you will. So you want to expand your bandwidth because you want to perceive all of these wonderful frequencies.
Yeah. So I guess what we're, in answer to Mary's question there, it would be like, I mean, let's take the God in a box, 528 hertz, right? Everyone's like, this is the frequency of love. Yes. But if you were at 527 and then with the example of we were just one frequency, then when we hit 528, we would be love. But then if we carried raising our vibration or our frequency and we went to 529, we would no longer be the 528 linear representation of love. But in actual fact, we would be everything from 0 to 529. And then if we went up to 650 or we hit 1000, so the point is that we're never one linear vibration. We are becoming more and more and more and more.
Sure. Well, in frequency, love is an emotion. It doesn't have a frequency. The frequency of love is whatever frequency you want to hang on it. What's a better radio station? AM 550 or AM 560? Well, it depends on what the information being carried on those two carrier frequencies are. Because again, that's how AM radio works, right? There's a carrier frequency, and that's what's noted on your dial on your radio. There's 540, 550, 560, 570, etc. They go up in 10 kilohertz increments all the way up to 1480, I think. But that radio station, you receive that information by dialing in that radio station. So you're not going to hear the information that's being carried on AM 540 if you tune into AM 580.
Yeah, because essentially love is infinite, and if something is infinite, it's like the void,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's everything.
Yeah.
Once it comes, it can be anything. And true love, which is, if we say, the foundation of all,
Mhm.
God, the universe, whatever we want to hang it on, it's undefined, so it's there, it's infinite.
Yeah.
Only once it stretches out of there does it become, in a sense, a vibration. Because if it's kind of at a 0 point.
Well, and people say, well, but I feel the vibrations of love. And it's like, well, no, you're like the tree. You experience the wind and you move with that wind when it resonates with you. Because you got to think, you've probably done this before. The wind is blowing, and that tree over there, that sapling is doing this sort of thing. So it's really vibrating to that wind. There's a resonance there, right? Meanwhile, there's an oak tree that's about 3 feet in diameter that's right next to it, and it's not moving. Maybe the leaves are, but here in winter, there's no leaves on it. So you'd have to look at that sapling and to see how it's resonating with that air current. But the elm tree standing right next to it is apparently unmoved by it.
Hmm.
That's because it doesn't resonate with that wind speed in that wind direction. So if you are feeling a frequency encounter, if you will, as being like the hair standing on the back of your neck kind of thing, that's because you're resonating with it. You know, the point and that's the joke I always make about the 528 being the frequency of love. So it implies that 527 is the frequency of like. And 529 is I love you, but you never take me anywhere. I mean, it's like, it doesn't make sense. Okay, frequency of love is whatever frequency you want to hang that on. The frequency of love is whatever frequency you want to express love with.
Hmm.
Period.
Okay, we got another question come in. Mary, I see yours too. I'll get back to that. No, I can't scroll through. Um, the question from Jeff is, how are the frequencies produced by Pyradym affecting our bodies, mind, and spirit?
Is this guy? Is this guy a plant? Did you put him in the
No,
studio?
no, he's a very good friend of mine, and he's all about Pyradym.
Oh, okay.
We don't have plants.
Yeah. Okay.
Our garden isn't that dry.
Yeah. I thought maybe you sent him a text and here, ask this question.
No, 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 no. You see my hands, they're not moving.
The thing about Pyradym is that, well, I always ask the question, okay, because I'm a musician, and if you heard me lecture before, I always say this as a little kid. I really, really enjoyed the way music made me feel. If I loved a song, I played that song over and 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 over again until because it made me feel so good. And then I got to the point where I wanted to study it, because I wanted to figure out why it made me feel so good. And then I became a musician, and I studied music in private and also at university. Um, to study the tricks of composition, mostly jazz composition and that sort of thing, in an attempt to sort of quantify all of the elements of that song and take it apart and dissect it and try to get to the root of what made me feel so good. And it's a futile attempt because it's one of those sort of things that eventually you take it apart so much that there's nothing left anymore. It does not bear up to scrutiny in that way. It does not bear up to dissection. So the answer to the question of why I like this song so much is because it resonates with me in some way. Either it's the key, or it's the tempo, or it's the structure of the chord changes. I mean, there's so many different elements in there. But there is something innately resonant about pure frequencies because they motivate and structurally, they move us structurally. And being able to avail yourself to that as a healing element is very powerful, because being able to resonate your body, and again, we're not just a physical body, we're 7 bodies, right? We got the spiritual body, energetic body, et cetera. So being able to resonate the human body at a specific frequency is a very transcendental, but is also a transitory experience, because you won't resonate with the same frequencies today as you did yesterday, and probably won't tomorrow. And not only is it an emotional thing, but it's also a physical thing, because don't forget, we are just a base, we're basically a bag of water, an intelligent bag of water. And so if you're dehydrated or over hydrated, you're going to have a different resonance frequency. So you're changing all the time. And coming back to the song thing, you love a song one day, and then the next day you hear it, you kind of go, oh, yeah, that's a good tune. But today I'm really digging this song, and that's the one you play over and over and over again, because there's something in that one that resonates with you. So it's I look at them as sonic vitamins. You take a lot of vitamin C today, and then tomorrow you probably don't need any vitamin C. So you maybe will be taking vitamin B or vitamin D or whatever. So, that's why this concept that there's only one frequency that's going to, light up your Christmas tree is ridiculous, because it's like saying that you're going to enjoy eating the same food every day for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
So as a musician, I realized that there was an innate connection that I make with this appliance. It's a piece of wood with some strings on it, but also coming up as an upright bass player. I mean, I'm an electric bass player primarily now, but I also play classical guitar and, acoustic guitars, 12 strings and all that kind of stuff. But I came up, one of the first instruments that I explored with was our school's double bass. And so when you grab that big piece of plywood with those big fat strings on it, and you fret a G, and you feel that vibration. And then I started to notice that it's like, when I slide down to an F sharp and play that note, I can feel that in my left knee. It's like, that's pretty interesting. G, no. F sharp, yeah, my knee is resonating with F sharp. And then you play an A, and it's like, wait a minute, I'm feeling that in my right hip. So there's a physical connection between, again, we're talking about the wavelength, because when you're changing frequency, when you're changing pitch on an instrument, you're changing the wavelength. And so you can focus in and resonate the human body in a lot of different ways with that frequency. But because you've motivated and given it that energy at that frequency for a certain amount of time, it probably won't resonate the same way. Maybe you pitch it down a little bit, and now you're resonating it again, or you pitch it up a little bit. No, that's the one scratching the itch. And I always draw that analogy too, because it's like, you get that one spot, there it is. Oh yeah, that's the one. And then you move an inch to the left. It's like, no, that's not the one. Here, this is the one. Okay. And then you scratch it a bunch, and then the itch goes away. But suddenly you got one over here, and it's like, think about it that way. If you could scratch these itches with different frequencies and enjoy that process, it's an interactive process. It's being able to hit all those points on your back.
Yeah, because we're ever changing, ever evolving.
Yes.
Every day is different. Like you say, we drink a glass of water, our resonant point alters. And we're back talking about the cells and the membranes.
Yeah. But to answer Jeff's question, I think what makes Pyradym so unique and so different is a couple of things. They're pure frequencies, they're analog frequencies. So in other words, they are developed in real time. They're not digital frequencies. And if we got time, we'll look into what makes digital frequencies insufficient, if you will. But an analog frequency is a continuous waveform that's being generated for continuous beings. You're not a digital sampled being. You exist continually in the time domain in this frame. So having pure analog waveforms that are, and this instrument is intended to function as a healing instrument. And also it's got a full available spectrum of sounds that are right at your fingertips. And so rather than having a computer or a machine that tells you that this is the frequency that you like, you're able to find that for yourself. You know, and again, going back to the analogy, you know, you ever wonder why you like a song? Well, you know, have you ever tried to tell somebody that, you know, oh, you really need to listen to this song because it's going to really, you know, change your life? And maybe it changed your life, but they listen to it and kind of go, you know, it doesn't work that way.
All right. A couple more things have come in here. Sabine, yes. Sonic vitamins, yes. Mary is a couple of things. Is expanding my bandwidth possible? I can say I want to be a piano, but even that has limits, right? And Darius, yes, don't go anywhere. I'll come to that in one moment, my brother.
Yeah. Interesting point. When, you know, we're talking about what we perceive frequency wise. Okay, so our physical being experiences vibration, low frequency stuff, and there's an overlap in the sonic domain down. So we're down here again. There's our keyboard. There's Mary the piano. So again, so all of these notes in here are resonating, you know, Mary. And again, you know, what about all the notes that are in the cracks of those between those keys? You know, those have value too, because we're talking about resonance here. We're not talking about making music. So here's the audio range. So approximately 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. But basically our aural perception falls off at around 16 kilohertz. But then when you move all the way up here, you see this, I don't know if you can see this, I'll turn it a little bit, but this is the visible spectrum, okay? So we're starting down here at infrared and then all the way up into, you know, this higher spectrum, and then you go into ultraviolet, and then it's weird doing this backwards.
Yeah.
But all this stuff in between, okay? So yeah, so you're able to perceive this very, very narrow bandwidth of visible light and this other area down here that you can hear audibly. But think about what it would be like if you were able to expand those bandwidths. You can't see infrared. You might want to, because that's typically where the data communities exist. Also on your remote control for your television, you know, it's an infrared controller, so you'd be able to see that stream that connects out of your remote going to your TV. I don't know what value that would be, but you know, so that's at the lower spectral, you know, visible spectrum. But at the other end of it, into violet and ultraviolet, now you're getting into the angelic realm. So, you know, you would be able to perceive angels. So if you were able to expand just your visible bandwidth, you would be able to visibly perceive a lot more of life. And animals do it. That's one of the ways that cats track their prey, is they are able to see the urine on the ground. And I think that falls in the, I think that's into the ultraviolet spectrum. So, you know, cats can see, well, and other animals can see down into infrared and can see into ultraviolet. We can't, but if we could, that would be.
But then again, we're talking about our physical vision. What about our inner vision? Because that's really where we're going to expand our bandwidth. That's where the intuition is going to come in, and we are going to reach the higher realms of existence, because we're tuning into that with our mind's eye.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, and again,
keep up your meditation, Mary. That's how you do it.
Yeah. Well, and think about what the constraints are to a physical existence, and being able to move beyond those constraints, because we do perceive and we do get so much information. We get millions and millions and millions of pieces of information every second of every day, but our physical senses are only able to perceive a small portion of that. Now think about if you were able to expand into that realm of understanding.
Yeah.
You know.
All right. So we're going to have to wrap up in a moment with this. But a great question from Darius in Poland. Tell us about silence.
Well, you can't have silence without, you can't have sound without silence, right? I mean, it's that that perturbation and creating that waveform, that wavefront, that the rarefaction of the space around you that's creating sound, and then when you put it out there and then cease, you allow it to come back in again. Talking all the time is of little value. Eventually you have to stop talking so that you can listen. So and again, this is a universe of parallels and paradoxes, and that's one of the paradoxes, is that there's sound on one side and silence on the other, and we just perceive that duality, and they're both of value.
Okay.
So, and again, that's another little plus to Pyradym, is that there's a broad range of selectable frequencies that you can interact with, but there's also a mute setting. So it sort of forces you that when you finished listening to all the sounds, again, I associated them with the chakras because I wanted a universal tuning standard and a recognizable tuning platform that people could get their heads around. But after every time you hit that little red button to move up to the next chakra, you'll hit it again, and the 8th chakra is silence. So,
yes. Sorry, I'm just checking the messages coming in. And yes, and with the silence that comes after the meditation, with any Pyradym meditation, the value of that silence is for the processing, right? It's like if we think that we've massaged ourselves, we've had the sonic massage, and then we're kind of letting the dust settle at the end of it to bring ourselves into the back into ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and you're communicating with the universe. And, again, a while ago with the kalimba, I said you're putting a gravitational wave. It's a scalar wave. You're putting a gravitational wave out into the universe. And we're actually continually doing that at some level. But, so you're continually having a dialogue with the universe. But in order for it to be a effective and constructive dialogue, you have to shut up long enough to be able to listen, right?
Yeah.
So many people are praying, and that's great, except that you sometimes have to just be still and allow your prayers to be answered. You need to allow the universe to respond in a way that you can understand.
Yes, because there's no use talking and asking for everything if you don't pause to listen.
Yeah, exactly.
Get the response. All right, we got okay, yeah. Well, Sabine says, I wonder what would happen if Pyradym was placed in the king's chamber. We'd probably get arrested.
Well, I do have it on good authority from some rather prominent people that if you go into the king's chamber in tone, and this individual, and Ben knows who I'm talking about. If you go into the king's chamber and do some effective toning and lock in on that resonance frequency, because don't forget, this is a resonant chamber, so it has a resonant frequency. And once you start resonating with that chamber, you're able to cause the quartz content through the piezoelectric effect. You're able to activate the quartz that's in the structure of that chamber, and there's a lot of fun things that go on in there, but a lot of people have seen spirals of light move out. Other people have seen, and the person I'm referring to has seen light beings sort of emerge from the walls that
Yes.
they can communicate with. So
Yes.
I think that would be an interesting experience.
So maybe one day to be.
Yeah. So that's kind of
And
what the point of that I was going to say that, and that kind of ties into what Jeff's question was. We can't all go to the King's Chamber, but we can kind of bring the King's Chamber to us. You can't get inside Pyradym, but you can experience that same concept at a certain level.
yes, and yes. Okay, yes, he says he'll be in Egypt, God willing, this March. We'll be in the King's Chamber. We'll go in there, do some toning, Sabine, and see what comes out of the walls.
Yeah, yeah.
You can get in the sarcophagus and tone in that, because I believe that was its original purpose.
Well, and I think they've since moved it, so I think they're probably by moving it, I think they've sort of deactivated it.
Yeah, altered. But don't worry, because we will be creating a sarcophagus for the Pyradym one day.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Right, I'm trying to scroll back to Mary's point, because that, the tech gods are struggling. Maybe I can find it on here.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. All right. Well, basically, Mary was saying that if she were to expand her bandwidth in the physical, then would she start seeing aspects that were invisible to the current naked eye, which I think we've just kind of dealt with that from that aspect of, yes, we would.
Mm-hmm. Oh, plenty of people have experienced the fairies, for example. I find it really interesting that these fictitious beings are cross-cultural. It's not like this one little pocket of people in Ireland and the only ones that have seen fairies and the only ones that have a mythology, if you will, built up around them. These things are all over the planet.
Yeah,
So
because
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, let me just read that. Because what she's saying is, hypothetically, if we increased our visible bandwidth, would we see other life forms that are here on 3D Earth, or are they in other dimensions?
Well, yes and no, because we tend to look at these things in a linear form. And that's one of the things that I'm actually still sort of decoding how to be able to present this in this format. But looking at things in a linear fashion in terms of a frequency ladder, if you will, a scale.
Yeah.
All that stuff starts to kind of fall apart a little bit when you start getting into the domain of phase, because phase implies that all frequencies are being propagated at the same time. Okay, but that doesn't happen in the real world. So in other words, if that makes sense, if we had the picture of the sine wave again up on the screen, but don't do it.
No, I'm not doing it.
But if you can envision that, okay, well, that sine wave starts at that particular zero crossing point and does this, and then comes back to that point again. Well, what about if there's a second wave that starts just slightly behind that one? So this one starts, and then a second one starts right behind that, and a third one. And so there's a phase component that when you enter into the time domain, it's not it doesn't necessitate or dictate that everything in the visible spectrum is all occurring at the same time. So in other words, if you can shift your phase, if you can go out of phase with linear time, you essentially become invisible.
Right.
So that there's a technique and there's a technology that's around that. So ETs and things like that.
Yeah, like the cloaking aspect, because you're matching it. So like if you have two records that are playing together. When they go into phase, there's that silence because they're cancelling. Each one is cancelling the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And yeah, she says Fairies is a perfect example. Do they live here too, or in another dimension? And again, I think that really comes back to the aspect of expanding our bandwidth, because if we tune in to a wider frequency range, then yes, we would see many of the things that exist there, like cats and dogs. You
yeah.
know, they sense things that are there. Mediums sense things. You know, I mean, that's a deep topic, Mary, and one that we will go into another time.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point of this, though, is creating a dialogue and creating understanding so that we're all, you know, on the same page. Because now, you know, we've looked at the chart, we realize there's a, you know, there's a lot more books on the shelf than we thought was in the library, and so now we're starting to open these books up and becoming aware of what, you know, what's what, and becoming more sophisticated in our understanding of these things. And through understanding, that's how you can move forward and evolve.
Yes, because you know, in the West, we've been raised with this aspect of we won't believe it until we see it, but
Right.
in the East, you will never see it until
Yeah.
you believe it.
It's the other
So,
way
Mary, if you're looking for Bigfoot, you got to believe that they're there, which they are there. The fairies are there, and they're not what we were taught about them. You know, these are light beings that operate in a different frequency spectrum,
Sure.
or a different bandwidth of the frequency spectrum.
Yeah.
So,
And that's it. It's, you know, it's not even necessarily this linear frequency kind of thing, you know. And I still want to build one. I want to build a big frequency knob, you know. So it's like, hey, let's turn up the frequency knob kind of thing to get that visual effect. But it's also, it's not so much where things happen, it's when things happen. If you're slightly out of time with the rest of the universe, you again render yourself to be invisible, and it's a very minute slice of time.
yeah,
Very, very, very small.
and that's why, folks, that alignment and expansion are very important, and the best way to do it is harmonically.
Good commercial.
And we have just the device. All right. Well, we've been going for an hour, so I guess we should break. And I'll plug in Pyradym, and we'll come back at what time should we come back? 12. Let's do 12:22, which is
Perfect.
9 minutes from now. And that's lots of God winks for Jeff, because he's really into the God wink thing recently. Uh, Hold on. If sound affects the way ice shapes, and I know that it does, and wisdom is encoded in water ice, how can we read it? Inquiring minds want to know. Mary, you're going to have to stay tuned for the next installment for that one. Okay. We will come back to you. Thanks everyone for the participation all over the world. That was very encouraging. And yeah, 12:22. We'll be back.
Keep asking questions.
Yes, and put them on the Yarah formation page. We're always here. You can message. You can just post them up. Put them in the group. All that good stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll tune in a few. Thank you. Thanks, August.
Thanks, Ben.
One.